Hi everybody. In this lesson we want to look at how we solve quadratic inequalities. Now this is the second part of a series, and so if you've never solved any quadratic inequalities, I'd recommend going back and looking at the first part of this where we looked more at why, some of the reasons why it works, why we do what we're doing to solve this. So this is another example. And to solve any quadratic inequality algebraically, what you want to do first is get 0 on one side. So I got x squared plus 6x plus 8 is less than 0. Just like if we were solving a quadratic equation, you'd want to get 0 on one side. Okay, from there I'm going to go ahead and factor that. And it does factor as x plus 2 times x plus 4. And if I set each of those factors equal to 0, I get x equals -2 and x equals -4. Now we call those critical values, okay? So those are my critical values. And those critical values break the number line into 3 intervals. Okay, so if I come down here, I'm going to go ahead and plot -4. Be sure you get these in order, right? -4 is to the left of -2 on the number line. And that divides the number line into this interval from -infinity to -4. And then I have another interval from -4 to -2, and then another interval from -2 to infinity. All right, so once I have those critical values and then I use those to divide the number line into these 3 intervals, I'm going to go ahead and choose a test point from each of these intervals. So like in this interval I'd choose -5, and in this interval something between -4 and -2. Looks like -3 would be a good one. In this interval you could choose -1, but 0 is actually usually easier to plug in, so I'm going to choose 0 out of this interval. Alright, so now what I want to do is I want to take the -5 and the -3 and the 0, and I want to plug it into this expression right here. And I want to test and see if when I plug -5 in there, does it make something less than 0. Alright, so notice when I plug -5 in there, and notice that's the same thing as plugging -5 in the original one. So you could make a table, you could do this on your calculator, that's what I did over here. -5 squared is 25, and 6 times -5 is -30, so 25 minus 30 would be -5, and -5 plus 8 is 3. So that's where that 3 comes from. You know, you might notice also that you could plug it in down here. -5 plus 2 is -3. And -5 plus 4 is -1, so the -3 times the -1, that's 3. And that might be easier if you're doing that by hand. Well, another way you could do it, I want to know where is this going to be less than 0? Where is it going to be negative? All right, and you see if I plug in -5, I get something positive. I get +3 in particular. I actually don't care that it's exactly 3 when I plug in -5. All I really care is that whether it's positive or negative. So notice that what I could do is I could plug the -5 in here. -5 plus 2, that's a -3. And all I really need is that it's something negative. And -5 plus 4, well, that's also something negative. And a negative number times a negative number is something positive. Okay, and like I mentioned a moment ago, if I plug in -5, I know I get exactly 3. But if you're doing this by hand, oftentimes it's easier to just work with the signs, because I ultimately only care is if it's positive or negative. If I plug -3 in here, I'd get 9. 9 minus 18 is a -9, plus 8 is a -1. So that's where the -1 comes from. Or you could plug -3 in here. -3 plus 2 is a -1. Well, it's something negative. And -3 plus 4 is a +1. That's something positive. And a negative times a positive is something negative. So again, I really don't care that it's exactly -1. All I care is that it's something negative. If I plug in 0, again I can see I'm going to get 0 squared plus 0 plus 8. That's 8. Or down here, 0 plus 2 is 2, and 0 plus 4 is 4, and 2 times 4 is the same 8. Or just dealing with the signs, if I plug in 0, I get 2, I got something positive. 4 is something positive, and a positive times a positive is certainly a positive number. So I want to know where is the x squared plus 6x plus 8 less than 0? Where is this factor times this factor less than 0? You can see it's less than 0 in this interval right here. And so this is the interval that I want, and that's going to be my solution. So my solution here is that interval where the inequality is satisfied. So it's going to be the interval from -4 to -2, and that's my answer. Any x's in this interval from -4 to -2, when I plug that in, is going to give me something negative, something less than 0. Now again, I could go ahead and graph this on my calculator. I could graph the inequality, and I could also graph the equation itself. So if I go to my graphing calculator and I plug in here the x squared plus 6x plus 8, and I'll just graph it on my standard window, you can see that it's less than 0. It's below the x-axis. It's going to be greater than 0 up here, right, and over here, which would be these x's. But it's less than 0 just in this little interval between -4, right? You can see it -1, -2, -3. Here's -4 and -2. And it's going to exactly equal 0. It's going to cross the x-axis there at -4, -2. So if I want it strictly less than 0, less than the x-axis, below the x-axis, I want just this interval right here. All right, so I have that graph here for you to look at. At the same time, I could also graph where is the x squared plus 6x plus 8 less than or equal to. So I'm going to go to this test menu right above the math. So notice I hit the second button right here, and then I'm going to hit the test menu, and I want number 5. Actually, I just want it less than. Okay, less than 0. And remember that this is a relational operator that tests where is x squared plus 6x plus 8 less than 0. And for the x values that makes it true, it's going to graph the number 1, and where the x values that make it false, it's going to graph the number 0. So if I graph that, I just get this little interval between -4 and 2 that I have right here. And so you can see that that interval corresponds exactly to where the graph is below the x-axis. All right, and that's the interval between -4 and -2. So when I graph the associated quadratic function, I want to see where the graph in this case is below the x-axis. All right, below the x-axis corresponds to where the x squared plus 6x plus 8 is less than 0. Okay?